Have you ever seen a little boy eat breakfast alone for weeks and nobody asked why? But she did something different. She didn't ask. She just brought him warm pancakes. Every single morning. Until one day, 4 black SUVs pulled up outside her tiny diner. And the man who stepped out, he changed everything. Stick around. This story will restore your faith in kindness, one plate at a time. The first time she walked into the Sunshine Diner, people acted like the sun had dimmed just for her. Not because she was loud, not because she did anything wrong, but because she was visible, and she wasn't supposed to be. Sienna Brooks, 32 years old, radiant smile, cocoa skin glowing like polished mahogany, wore her hair in soft coils pulled back with a blue bandana. She carried herself like joy was a muscle she'd trained daily, even when her shoes had holes and her tips barely paid for groceries. Every morning at 6:10 sharp, she arrived, 15 minutes early, apron on, headphones in, humming old gospel songs while unlocking the front door. The cook, Danny, barely nodded. The hostess, Taylor, avoided eye contact like it might stain her mascara. And the manager? He only remembered her name when a complaint came through, never when she stayed late to clean the booths others skipped. But Sienna didn't care, or at least she pretended not to, because the truth is, she'd grown used to being dismissed. The way some customers refused to hand her their cards, preferring to leave them on the edge of the table, or how they'd call her sweetheart in a tone that dripped with more condescension than sugar. Still, every cup of coffee she poured came with a smile. Every plate she served came with a quiet prayer. You never know what someone's battling, she often told herself. She never imagined that same grace would one day circle back, wrapped in black-tinted glass and roaring engines. But that's getting ahead of the story. This story begins on a rainy Tuesday in February. Business was slow, the kind of day where you wipe the counter 3 times just to stay awake. Sienna had just come back from delivering pancakes to booth 9 when the front door chimed softly. In stepped a boy. Couldn't have been more than 7. Alone, drenched hoodie, mismatched sneakers, eyes too serious for someone so small. He didn't speak, just pointed to the corner booth like he'd been there before. Sienna knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "Hey there, sugar. You okay?" He nodded once, then slowly pulled out a damp $20 bill and slid it across the table. "I like pancakes, please. No butter, and a glass of warm milk." Sienna blinked, not because of what he ordered, but because of how he said it, like he'd memorized it, like it mattered that he got it right. "Coming right up," she said softly, pocketing the bill and giving him a wink. As she turned to walk away, she noticed something else. The booth across the diner, usually reserved for businessmen who left her 5% tips, was suddenly silent. A man in a tailored overcoat was watching. Not in judgment, not in curiosity, in recognition. That moment would mean nothing to her, yet. But 3 weeks later, when 4 matte black Range Rovers rolled up outside the Sunshine Diner, that look would be the thread that tied everything together. And Sienna? She was about to find out that a simple act of kindness could open the kind of door money couldn't buy. Not even billionaire money. The next morning, he returned. Same booth. "I have the same hoodie, and it's still too big." Same voice, quiet but deliberate. "Pancakes. No butter. Warm milk." This time, he slid a $10 bill across the table. It was crumpled, damp around the edges, like it had been fished out of coat pocket last minute. Sienna didn't flinch. She smiled, tucked the bill in her apron, and said, "You got it, hon. Extra syrup on the side, just in case you change your mind." He blinked once. That was his thank you. By the end of the week, he was a fixture, 7:22 sharp, seat by the window, eyes flicking between the door and the street. Always alone, always polite, and always tipping a few crumpled bills like someone had taught him well. Sienna noticed the bruises, not on his skin, but in his silence. Kids that age didn't sit that still unless they'd been trained to disappear. She never asked his name, and he never asked why she sometimes refilled his milk even before he asked. But not everyone saw him the same way. "I hope he's not one of those little scams," Taylor muttered, popping gum behind the counter. "You know, those YouTube prank kids. Record you giving them free food, then turn it into a sob story for views." Danny just grunted from the kitchen. "If he's scamming, he's terrible at it." Tips better than the lawyers who sit in booth 3. But the manager, Chuck, wasn't amused. You giving him discounts? He asked Sienna one night after closing. She looked up from mopping. Excuse me? The kid. The one in the hoodie. You charging him full price? Yes. Every time. What? Chuck leaned in, his breath a mix of menthols and burnt coffee. He gives off a weird vibe. You ever ask where his parents are? Nope, she said, ringing them up. Maybe you should. But she didn't. Because Sienna knew something Chuck didn't. Hunger wasn't always about food. Sometimes it was about being seen. And this kid? He didn't want charity. He wanted normal. So, every day she gave him exactly that. A warm meal and no questions. Until Friday, everything changed. He walked in that morning with no money. Just wide eyes and clenched fists. I'm sorry, he whispered. I can't pay today. I can leave, Sienna crouched beside him, reached into her apron, and slid a plate of pancakes onto the table. Sweetheart, she said, lowering her voice, pancakes already made. If I throw them out, that's just waste. Can you help me out and eat them so my boss doesn't think I'm slacking? He stared at her, confused, suspicious, and then grateful. That was the first morning he smiled. Tiny, fleeting, but real. What neither of them knew was that someone had seen that smile from outside the diner. A man in a gray BMW, hands on the steering wheel, watching, not in malice, but in something else entirely. Recognition, like a door was cracking open, and something powerful was about to step through. Saturday came with freezing rain and an air so sharp it could slice through bone. Sienna was sweeping the front steps of the diner when she saw the boy again, this time without his hoodie. His shirt was thin, his shoes were soaked, his hands were red and stiff from cold. And still, he walked with his head high, eyes forward like a soldier on a mission. Morning, sunshine, she called gently, stepping aside to hold the door. He didn't smile this time, but he nodded once and stepped inside. She led him to his booth without a word. Minutes later, a hot plate of cinnamon oatmeal and warm milk appeared in front of him, steam rising like a gentle welcome. This time, he didn't try to pay. He just whispered, "Thank you, miss," and started eating like he hadn't touched food in 2 days. Across the diner, 2 regulars, both retirees, watched with narrowed eyes. "Isn't that the stray kid she's been feeding?" one muttered. "Should have known," the other replied. "One of these days, he'll bring trouble. You watch." Sienna heard it. She always did. But she kept moving, kept pouring coffee, kept checking on him like he was any other customer, because to her, it was... She didn't notice the gray BMW parked across the street again. She didn't see the man inside jotting notes on a yellow notepad, eyes never leaving the window. But someone else did. Chuck. That afternoon, as Sienna was scraping gum off the bottom of a booth, he pulled her into the back office. "I don't like this," he said. "That kid's drawing attention. Some guy's been watching the diner 2 days in a row. Gray car. Fancy. You know him?" "No." "You sure?" "Positive." Chuck ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, I can't afford drama in here, Sienna. You know how folks around here get. We give a little, they say we're hiding something. We give more, we're a front for something shady." Sienna crossed her arms. "He's a child. He comes in. He eats. That's it." Chuck stared at her, then sighed. "Just be careful. People notice more than you think." She left the office burning. Not with anger. With worry. Not for herself, for him. That night, just before closing, the boy hesitated at the door. He turned back. For the first time, he looked her in the eye and said, "My dad, he's not coming back yet. He's busy." Sienna blinked. "Okay," she said, crouching to his level. "Well, until he does, I got you covered here. Deal?" He nodded. His voice cracked on a whisper, "Deal." And then he left. Sienna stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the misty dark. The next morning, the booth was empty, and the BMW was gone. But in its place, a matte black Tesla, parked neatly across the street. Windows were tinted so dark that they looked like secrets. And someone, some powerful someone, was inside, watching. Sunday morning dawned in silence. No rain, no wind, just the kind of cold that crept under door frames and curled around ankles like an unwelcome guest. Sienna arrived early, as always. The diner still smelled of bleach and burnt toast from a night shift. She clicked on the lights, started the coffee, and tied her apron with the same practiced grace she always had. But something felt off. The boys' booth was empty. Again. And the Tesla? Still there. Same spot. Unmoved. Like a statue with secrets. By 8:30, the usual crowd began to shuffle in. Old-timers with their routines, truckers with thick boots and thicker accents, and the pastor's wife with her silent judgments served in smiles and pearls. Sienna moved between tables like clockwork, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. It happened. The diner door opened, not with the usual jingle of the bell, but with a hush, as if the world had leaned in to listen. He stepped in, tall, caramel-skinned, dressed in a dark wool coat that probably cost more than her annual rent. Impeccable shoes. Handsome, yes, but there was something else. A heaviness in his eyes, the kind only men with too much responsibility carried. He scanned the room once, locked eyes with her, and walked straight toward her, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm, clipped, like it had practiced boardrooms more than breakfast counters. "Are you Sienna Brooks?" The room went still. Every fork paused mid-air. Taylor stopped mid-gossip. Even Danny peeked from the kitchen. Sienna blinked, setting down a coffee pot. "Yes. Can I help you?" He extended a hand. His watch peeked from under his cuff. "Patek Philippe, rose gold. The kind you didn't just buy. You inherited it. My name is Malcolm Easton." The name landed like a dropped tray. Malcolm Easton, the billionaire, founder of Viridian tech investor in half of Silicon Valley. Youngest single black CEO to ever crack the Forbes 400. And he was standing in her diner, looking right at her. "I believe you've been feeding my son." For the first time in a long time, Sienna was speechless. The room erupted. Taylor gasped so hard she choked on her gum. Chuck dropped a receipt book. The pastor's wife clutched her pearls like someone had insulted the Virgin Mary. Sienna stepped back. "You are your son?" Malcolm nodded, his voice softening. "His name is Elijah. He never told you, did he?" She shook her head slowly. "He wouldn't," he added. "Not until he trusted you. And apparently, he does." She swallowed hard, her heart racing. "He said you were kind," Malcolm said. "That you didn't look at him like a problem. That you didn't ask questions. That you let him eat, even when he couldn't pay." Sienna opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "He's safe now," Malcolm continued. "With me. But he insisted I come here personally. Said you didn't just feed him breakfast. You made him feel human." And then, for the first time that morning, Malcolm Easton smiled. A soft, broken, grateful smile. "I owe you more than I can say." And just like that, the entire diner, every customer, every cynic, every person who had ever judged her, was watching the woman they used to call charity workers stand face to face with power. And for once, she wasn't the one who owed anybody anything. "Can we talk?" Malcolm asked, his voice low but firm. Sienna nodded, still stunned, and gestured toward the far end of the counter, her corner. The one the regulars called Sienna's spot, usually more out of habit than respect. Today, it felt like a throne. As they sat, the rest of the diners tried, and failed, to look uninterested. Taylor dropped a spoon 3 times just to walk past. Chuck pretended to adjust the thermostat 6 inches from their booth. Sienna folded her hands. Elijah, he never said much. He just showed up. Malcolm leaned in. He does that. Has since his mother passed. There it was. The thing behind the boy's silence. The ache in his shoulders. The kind of loss a child shouldn't have to carry. "I was overseas. Emergency tech project. Our company was doing disaster relief for a refugee camp. I was supposed to be gone for 3 weeks. Malcolm said, voice tight. It turned into 3 months. He looked down, tracing the rim of his coffee cup. My sister was watching him, or she was supposed to be. Turned out that she pawned off the responsibility to a neighbor, then skipped town. I didn't find out until Elijah called me. Himself, from a public library phone. Sienna's heart dropped. How long was he alone? Malcolm's jaw tightened. Long enough. He's resourceful, smart beyond his years, but he's still a child. When I flew back, he wouldn't tell me where he'd been staying. Just kept asking if I remember Mom's pancakes. I didn't understand what he meant, until I checked his school attendance and traced his morning route. He paused and looked at her. And that's how I found this place. Sienna nodded slowly. He never asked for anything. Always paid when he could. Always thanked me. That's because you treated him like a person, Malcolm said. Not a charity case. Not a nuisance. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim envelope. I don't want to make this weird, he said, but I came prepared. If you're struggling. Sienna held up a hand, calm but firm. I didn't do it for money. I know, Malcolm said. That's why I want to help. She exhaled, eyes softening. Then don't give me cash. If you want to help, start by telling your son he wasn't a burden. Malcolm blinked. Tell him he mattered, Sienna continued, her voice trembling slightly. Because I've seen that look before. That fear, that shame. It's not easy to unlearn. He nodded, slowly tucking the envelope away. I will, he said. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Malcolm asked, would you consider something else? Sienna tilted her head. I'm opening a foundation, focused on supporting kids like Elijah. Not just scholarships, but real care. Emotional, practical, human. And I want people like you running it. She blinked. Me? You don't need a fancy degree to know what compassion looks like, he said. You've lived it. You gave my son something I couldn't when he needed it most. A warm meal. And dignity. Sienna looked down at her hands, cracked from dish soap, nicked from plates, worn from years of being invisible. And for the first time in forever, someone wasn't asking her to do more. They were asking her to lead. Sienna didn't answer right away. She sat with Malcolm's offer like it was a plate of something she wasn't sure she was allowed to taste. After all, no one had ever offered her a seat at the table, let alone asked her to build the damn thing. She looked up. I'm not qualified for that. I've never run anything but a register. I can't even get my landlord to fix the heater. Malcolm smiled. Exactly. That's why you're perfect. She frowned. That makes no sense. It does, he said, leaning in. Because you don't see this as a program. You see people. You've lived this. You knew what my son needed before anyone else did. I can hire 10 consultants with MBAs, but I'll never find another Sienna Brooks. That made her laugh, sharp and short. Well, sir, I hope not. This one barely sleeps and cries over dog commercials. He laughed, too, but his eyes never lost their seriousness. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a partnership. Sienna studied him. Her whole life had been about surviving the next shift, the next bill, the next moment someone tried to make her feel small. But this was different. Before she could respond, the diner door opened. It was Elijah. He stood there, smaller than she remembered, like grief had shrunk him. His backpack was gone. In its place, a small envelope clutched in both hands like a sacred offering. When he saw her, he walked straight over, ignoring the stares, the whispers. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, he said softly. I work every Sunday, Sienna replied, her voice breaking a little. You were the only one who ever noticed. Elijah reached into his coat and handed her the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, written in careful, blocky handwriting. Thank you for seeing me. When no one else did. Sienna pressed the note to her chest like it was air. And then, without prompting, without fear, Elijah reached out and hugged her. A full, trembling, quiet hug that broke every conversation in the room like a record scratch. Taylor stopped mid-order. The cook put down his spatula. The pastor's wife, for once, didn't say a thing. And from the corner, Chuck slowly took off his cap. When Elijah let go, he turned to his father. Can she still work here? Even if she works for you? Malcolm raised an eyebrow. You want her to keep working at the diner? Elijah nodded. It's her place. It makes people feel full, even before the food. Sienna blinked back tears. That's a pretty good endorsement, Malcolm said. Best one I've ever gotten, she whispered. And just like that, a boy once invisible to the world had made it clear. In a town that tried so hard not to see her, Sienna Brooks had never gone unnoticed. By Monday, the story had already outgrown the diner. It started with a blurry cell phone photo. Elijah hugging Sienna, her hand clutching his thank you note like it held the last drop of hope. Someone had posted it to the local Facebook group with a caption. Turns out the stray kid had a billionaire for a father, and he called her the only person who saw him. It spread like a spark in a wheat field. By noon, the phones at Sunshine Diner rang nonstop. News vans parked across the street, like vultures circling a miracle. Customers poured in, some curious, some guilty, all wanting to sit at her counter. But Sienna? She just showed up at 6:10 sharp. Same apron, same quiet humming. She had the same grace in the way she poured coffee. She didn't bask in the attention. She didn't correct the rumors. And when reporters asked for an interview, she simply said, "I serve pancakes." Not headlines. Chuck, for once in his managerial life, didn't argue. He just handed her a coffee and muttered, "For what it's worth, I was wrong." Sienna raised an eyebrow. "About what? You don't just feed people. You change the air in the room." She snorted. "Well, don't get too sentimental, Chuck. People might think you have a heart." He grinned, shook his head, and left her to the growing crowd. But the real shock came at 3 p.m. A glossy black charter bus pulled up outside the diner. The kind you'd expect to see at a movie premiere, not parked between a vape shop and a laundromat. Out stepped Malcolm Easton again, this time in a navy suit, no tie, flanked by a press secretary and 2 assistants carrying clipboards. He walked straight to the front door, where Sienna was wiping down a menu stand. "What now?" she asked, half joking. He smiled. "Hope you don't mind, but I made a few calls." She stared at him, suspicious. "What kind of calls?" "Official ones." Before she could reply, he handed her a folder. Inside, incorporation documents. The Elijah Initiative, a new nonprofit backed by Malcolm Easton's foundation, with a 7-figure launch donation and a mission statement handwritten by Elijah himself. No kid should have to feel invisible to eat. Sienna flipped through the pages, jaw slack. Malcolm shrugged. "It's not just for show. It's for every diner, every school, every corner store where a kid might sit alone, hungry, afraid to ask. I want them to know someone is looking out for them. Someone like you." Sienna swallowed hard. "And I want you to run it." Her laugh was a shaky exhale. "Malcolm, I don't want someone with a resume," he interrupted. "I want someone who knows what it means to hand a kid pancakes and dignity without asking why." Sienna looked up. Her eyes weren't just glassy, they were fire. "All right," she said, "but I'm doing it my way." Malcolm smiled widely. "That's the only reason I asked." Behind them, the door swung open. Elijah stepped out and stood beside his father, head held high, eyes proud. He looked at her and whispered, just loud enough to be heard, "Now the whole world gets to meet the lady who saved me." The next week was a blur, like someone had spun her world around and forgotten to stop the turntable. Reporters camped outside the diner before sunrise. TV anchors mispronounced her name with forced grins. And a producer from New York left 5 voicemails offering her a 6-episode docuseries with final cut privileges. Sienna ignored them all. Real life didn't pause for cameras. The diner still had eggs to crack, orders to run, counters to wipe. People still spilled coffee and complained about toast. Except now they look her in the eye. The same customers who once called her, "Hey, you now," called her Miss Brooks. They lingered after meals, slipping folded notes into her apron. "Thank you for what you did for that boy. You reminded me what it means to care. My son's in foster care. I hope he meets someone like you someday." It was dizzying, overwhelming, beautiful, and exhausting, because with recognition came responsibility. Malcolm's foundation had already secured a building downtown for the Elijah Initiative's first headquarters. A modest space, but clean and warm, with a playroom, offices, and a kitchen that Sienna insisted must always smell like cinnamon and hope. She hired 3 people that week, 2 social workers and a retired lunch lady named Joyce who knew when a kid was lying about eating. They worked late into the night, building programs, designing outreach, and planning the launch. But something strange happened. Each night, Sienna found herself back at the diner, wiping counters long after closing, reorganizing condiments, watching the reflection of the empty booth where Elijah used to sit. Not because she had to, because she wasn't sure who she was without it. Malcolm noticed. "You okay?" he asked one evening. Leaning on the counter, tie loosened, Elijah asleep in a booth behind him. Sienna hesitated. Look at all this." "I am looking," he said gently, "and I see someone who built a movement from scratch and still comes back to mop a diner floor." She laughed quietly. Maybe I don't know how to do anything else. Malcolm's face softened. Or maybe you just don't want to lose the thing that made you who you are. She looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to say it aloud. I'm scared, Malcolm. He nodded. So was I. When I started my company. When I held Elijah for the first time. When I came here and realized my son trusted a stranger more than me. They were silent for a long moment. Then he added, You don't have to pick one life over the other, Sienna. We'll figure this out. Together. The word hung in the air. Together. And she believed it. The next morning, a formal envelope arrived at the diner, delivered by courier. Inside, a job offer from a national child welfare agency, an executive position, 6-figure salary, full benefits, and a chance to scale the Elijah initiative nationwide. There was only one condition. She'd have to relocate to D.C., leave the diner behind. And the boy who once changed her life by ordering pancakes with no butter, he might lose her, just as he'd finally found someone who stayed. The envelope sat on her nightstand for 2 days. Untouched. I left it unopened after the first read. But not unseen. Sienna kept glancing at it like it might explode, like it might whisper something cruel if she got too close. A job like that, in D.C., that kind of salary could erase years of struggle. No more late rent. No more rationing groceries. No more secondhand shoes. It was a ticket to a new life. But it was also a farewell. To the booth where Elijah once sat, tracing syrup patterns on his plate. To the counter she leaned against when her back ached, but her heart stayed soft. To the people who once looked through her and now saw her. On Tuesday morning, she arrived at the diner early. Earlier than usual. The streets were still dark. The air tasted like snow. Chuck hadn't even turned on the kitchen lights. She just sat there in silence, at Elijah's old booth, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, as if the warmth could decide for her. At 7:13, the door opened. Elijah walked in alone, not because he was neglected, but because for the first time since he came to this town, he felt safe enough to walk without fear. He sat across from her and pulled something from his backpack. A shoebox, painted blue, glitter around the edges. Made with the full creative force of an 8-year-old on a mission. I wanted to give you this before. He trailed off, unsure. Before what, sweetheart? She asked. He looked down. Before you go away. Sienna's chest tightened. Who told you I might leave? Dad didn't. But I saw the letter. And you've been quieter. She opened the box. Inside, a folded napkin with a doodle of them eating pancakes. A plastic ring from the diner's lost and found toy jar. A tiny note in crayon. You were my first safe place. And taped to the bottom was $1. One of the first ones you let me keep my change, he said. I saved it. Sienna couldn't breathe. Elijah, baby, this is the best gift I've ever gotten. He nodded slowly, then whispered, I don't want you to stay because of me. But I want you to know you made me want to grow up. Sienna's tears came slow and warm. Sweetheart, she said, you already have. That night, she stood in front of the community center Malcolm had renovated for the Elijah Initiative. She had a job offer in one hand. The shoebox is in the other. The media wanted headlines. The agency wanted her name. The country wanted a face for their next campaign. But Elijah? He just wanted her to be where she was needed most. By sunrise, Sienna made her decision. She didn't call D.C. She called Malcolm. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He didn't sound surprised. Then we'll bring the world to you. The grand opening of the Elijah Initiative looked nothing like the town expected. There were no ribbon-cutting celebrities. No fireworks. No hired influencers pretending to care. Just people. Hundreds of them. Veterans, social workers, bus drivers, cafeteria ladies. Fathers with children on their hips. Mothers holding hands with kids who refused to speak to strangers but clung tightly to Sienna's leg. The building itself wasn't fancy. White brick, 2 stories, a playground out back, and a modest sign above the door. But inside, magic, a reading nook with beanbags and blankets. A kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and safety. A closet full of coats that didn't carry the shame of donations, just tags with sizes and quiet dignity. Every hallway was painted with murals, one wall entirely dedicated to kids' art, another with a quote in block letters. Sometimes feeding a hungry child without asking why they're hungry is the greatest kindness of all. Jenny Miller's, from a diner in Kansas, once saved a soldier's son with pancakes. Elijah had insisted they honor her, too. "I want people to know we weren't the first," he told Sienna. "We're just next." By noon, cameras had arrived. Not because they were invited, but because word had spread. CNN, ABC, and even a crew from BBC stood outside the little center, filming as a line wrapped around the block. Not for handouts, for hope. Malcolm stepped up to the podium, suit sharp, voice steady. But he didn't speak long. "This isn't about tech," he said. "It's about time. Time we stop pretending that success is measured in dollars. It's measured in how long we let someone sit in silence before asking what they need." Then he stepped back and let Sienna speak. She didn't prepare a speech. She just walked up, her apron still tied over a navy blue blouse, and looked out at the crowd with tears caught in the corners of her eyes. "I didn't plan any of this," she began, voice soft but clear. "I just gave a kid some pancakes because he looked hungry and because I knew what it felt like to be invisible." A hush fell. "I never wanted to be famous. I wanted to be useful. I wanted someone to leave the diner feeling more full than when they came in. That's still all I want." Then she looked at Elijah. "And if one person, one child, walks into this place and feels safe without needing to explain why they're scared, then we did our job." Applause erupted, not the performative kind, the kind that comes from people who know exactly what it costs to care. And across town, Sunshine Diner stayed open. Chuck framed Elijah's crayon note and hung it above booth 4. The shoebox sat in Sienna's office, still filled with treasures no bank account could match. And each morning, she poured the coffee, tied her apron, and walked between the diner and the initiative like they were two sides of the same bridge. Because they were. One served meals. The other served second chances. As Malcolm once said, you don't have to pick one life over the other. Not when you've built a life that lifts others with both hands. Some people wait a lifetime for someone to notice them. Sienna Brooks didn't wait. She noticed others first. And in doing so, she reminded a broken world that kindness doesn't need credentials. It needs courage. If this story moved you, if you believe one act of compassion can echo across generations, subscribe to Story Precious. Because the world needs more Siennas. And maybe, just maybe, the next one is you.